All right, hello people from the internet. Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's Ninethelter here with another video. Today I'm gonna be talking about weapon brands and how they interact with certain weapon types. It is going to be a bit more simple than what you think, but it's probably gonna give you like another perspective in regards of weapons and brands that you may or may not have thought about before. This is what I personally use to make decisions when it comes to choosing a weapon, when it comes to choosing a brand for said weapon in my games. It doesn't play as much of a factor, but it does play a factor. It is something that I do consider, so it might help you. Before I begin, however, two things. The first one is that I opened a Patreon, so there's going to be a Patreon link in the description if you feel like contributing. Contributions help a lot. It really, really does help me to be able to continue making these videos and to continue streaming, to continue just creating crawl content. So if you can help me with Patreon, I would appreciate it. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you should probably speed up the video. When I listen to myself for timestamp purposes, I play the video at like 1.5 speed, so that's what I would recommend, but you do what feels more comfortable to you. With that being said, I'm gonna begin this video by talking about item. Yeah, and the item that we're gonna be talking about is an executioner's axe. Let's go for a great mace actually. I feel like it's easier to use a great mace than an executioner's axe. So you can see here that a great mace is an enormous metal warcloth of great cumbrousness. The base damage is 17 and the base attack delay is 1.7, which means that in order to get it to min delay, I need to get 20 skill. Yeah, 20 skill is it is a fair amount. It is more than you would get on a one-hander, of course, because this is a two-hander. But it's not as much as the 22 that is required for some weapons, like the triple sword, or the 24 that you would need for an executioner's axe or a bardiche. So yeah, it is a pretty good weapon to be reviewing for this, I think, because it is very approachable. It does have the downside of being a two-hander, so that means that you don't get a shield, but I think that's a topic for another video. Um, anyway, the the weapon's min delay is an important thing, 0.7, and the weapon's base damage being 17 means that this weapon is not gonna do that well with brands that are like that just adds damage to the weapon, like electrocution or distortion. Um, this kind of weapon that deals a lot of base damage and is not the fastest weapon around is going to do much better if you use a brand like Flaming or Freezing or Vorpal that just multiply the amount of damage that you're dealing with the weapon. Once again, because of the massive base damage, this gets multiplied very heavily. As you can see here, an estimate of the formula. Damage rating, I think, is the amount of damage that you deal per turn when swinging this, depending on your character. The one that I have right now is just like a brand new character, so the damage rating is kind of trash. But yeah, is it for turn or is it for attack? I don't remember exactly. This is a brand new thing, so I don't know exactly how it works. But it is a good thing to use if you're playing Thrunk or in the future 0.29 onwards to be able to determine which weapon is better for your character. So yeah, that is what I think when it comes to weapons that are very heavy. All right. Now let's check something that's slightly less heavy, in the form of let's say a Demon Trident. I think a Demon Trident is perfect for this. All right. A Demon Trident is a terrible three-pronged weapon molded by fire and brimstone. As you can see, the base damage is 12, and the weapon's attack delay is 0.6. It is lower than the min delay for the Great Mace because the base attack delay is 1.3, and you don't need to get to 20 skill to get to min delay with a Demon Trident. You only need 14. Um, what that means is that this weapon is faster than the or than the Great Mace, and by extension, it's gonna make much better use of those brands that I didn't really like on the Great Mace, such as Electrocution and Distortion, because you're just gonna attack more because the weapon attacks faster, and by extension, you're gonna get more applications of that base damage that the brand adds to your weapon. On the other hand, weapon brands such as Flaming, Freezing, or Vorpal, as I mentioned earlier, are not going to be that great for a Demon Trident because the base damage is only 12 when compared to the base damage of the Great Mace. Well, that's a huge difference, 17 versus 12, especially when you take into account that that base damage then gets multiplied by this little formula right here, which ends in your potential damage every turn. So yeah, that's it for Demon Tridents. However, the base damage is still decent enough that I wouldn't like complain or be unnerved about my weapon brand being one of those flaming freezing Vorpal that I mentioned earlier. Often I do try to re-roll those away because electrocution is just the best. Distortion is also okay, but I don't like it too much because of the blinking effect of distortion. Blinking away a monster that has a strong ranged attacks might be more trouble than it's worth. So pretty much electrocution it is when it comes to me and brands. Um, so yeah, let's go ahead and check two more weapons. We're gonna get into weapons that are slightly faster. Like in this case, we're gonna see a demon whip. No, let's go for a normal whip. A normal whip is a pretty good example. It's not only a pretty good example, but it's also a weapon that you're gonna 100% find in the early game. So if you read identify scroll of brand weapon, you might want to retain some brands. As you can see with the whip, the base damage is 6 and the min attack delay is 0.5. The base damage is trash, obviously, but it's a very early game weapon. The thing that we want to see, the thing that we care about is the minimum attack delay. As you can see, it's 0.5 and it's reached skill level 12. This is very easy to acquire earlier in the game. You can rush it pretty much with almost every character, and it's not gonna be that much of an issue. Whips do extremely well with brands such as Distortion, Distortion, Electrocution, and Poison. I mentioned Poison where I hadn't mentioned Poison for the other weapons because this is a very early game weapon, and early game weapons do benefit a lot from Poison Brand. Poison Brand deals like some very small amount of damage, but it turns out that the monsters that you're gonna see in the early game, even monsters that you would think are a bit more robust, like Orc Warriors. Let's check an Orc Warrior. It has like 20 something HP. Yeah, 28, about 28. It usually doesn't have no armor class because it's usually wearing like plate or something, and by extension, it's gonna be very difficult for you to kill it. But if you have electrocution, distortion, or poison in your whip, the whip is pretty much gonna kill it with not a lot of difficulty. You're usually gonna win a 1 versus 1 fight by the time you see one of these guys if you have a weapon like that, and if you have like 50 HP or so. Do be wary if you're fighting one of these guys because they sometimes spawn with some ridiculous items. I've had Orc Warriors generate with glaives and stuff, and yeah, that can deal a lot of damage to you. So do check the weapon that the Orc Warrior is wielding before going for it. Mm, anyway, that's a good brand that you can get on a whip. Venom, Electrocution, or Distortion. Yeah. It's an early game weapon, so it's not something that you would like invest heavily on. It is really not something that you should enchant or brand because it's an early game weapon with very bad damage. Um, so yeah, this is only in case you're using like a whip. Maybe you're running around with a whip of protection and you happen to find a whip of electrocution or distortion or venom, as I've been mentioning. That's when you would like to switch from protection, probably, into using one of those brands. Um, and let's see, the final example for a weapon that I have is going to be a quick blade. Oh, sorry. Quick blade. Um, Guy Gimbal is pretty good. I'm also gonna talk about that. So we have a quick blade here. As you can see, the base damage is 5, so even lower than that of the whip, but the base attack delay is 0.7. This means that if you grab a +0 quick blade with, well, it doesn't matter, like the enchantment doesn't matter, but like if you grab it and you start using it with 0 skill, you're gonna be attacking as fast as a dude with a great mace with 20 skill and maces. Of course, the damage is gonna be much, much higher for the dude with the great mace. But yeah, like the attack delay is very, very fast. Yeah, the lower the faster, because this means a turn has passed. Like 1.0 means one whole turn. So 0.7 is less than one turn, and 0.3 is much less than one turn. This means that you get 10 attacks every 3 turns with the Quick Blade. 10 attacks. What does that mean? It means that you should try your best to get distortion or electrocution on your quick blade, because those brands benefit very heavily from being able to do 10 attacks in 3 turns. You should also try to get rings of slaying. If you're using a quick blade or a demon whip or a demon trident, any weapon that's faster than 0.7 min delay is going to benefit much more from slaying. So yeah, you can still get slaying for your 0.7 weapons, and it will be okay. After all, it is a slaying. But on my characters, I would try to not go for slaying when I have a slow weapon like that. Or like I wouldn't like value it as highly. Like if I have to choose between using a defensive ring for like a resistance or something and using slaying, I'm gonna lean towards going for the defensive ring because I know that slaying is not gonna get as much value as it would get from using slaying on a quick blade or a demon trident or a demon whip. That kind of weapon. So yeah, with quick blades, you really don't want to see the brands that multiply the damage. You don't want to see the flamings or the freezings or the vorpals or the drainings. You do not want to see any of that because you're not gonna get a lot of value out of those brands. So with a quick blade, I would actively try to re-roll it as much as possible until I get the brand that I want, which in this case is electrocution or distortion. Um, so yeah, those are the brands that I look forward to having and getting for the end game. Um, on the other hand, there's the brands for the early game, which I did already mention a bit with the mention of Venom brand. Venom brand, the more the game progresses, the worse it gets, but not because the effect of the brand like lessens or weakens. It's more because you're gonna start encountering more monsters like leeches and tentacled monstrosities and dragons and stuff that are just like resistant to poison or straight up immune. So it's not gonna speed up the killing of those monsters. By the time you start seeing those guys, you really should try to get rid of your poison brand or your draining brand. And on the opposite hand, in the early game, those brands, poison, draining, protection, spectral, are fantastic. Specifically, spectral. Spectral, if you find like whatever you find with Spectral, you can use it and you can just hit the monster with like actually 0 weapon skill, and the Spectral weapon will carry you. It is that strong for the early game. Of course, eventually you're gonna get to the point where if you're swinging a weapon at zero skill, it's gonna take you a while to swing it, and by extension, the monster is gonna get you with one or two attacks every time you swing it. So the monster is gonna start heavily out damaging you. When that happens, you have to make a decision between actually training for the weapon skill or just abandoning the plan of using TAF. But before you get to that point, Spectral really is like the ultimate offensive weapon skill in the early game. Um, on the other hand, we also have the protection brand that I mentioned. It gives you 7 armor class temporarily whenever you hit a monster with the weapon. 7 armor class in the early game is a ridiculously high amount of armor class. Going from 3 to 10 armor class is a lot. Going to from 10 to 17 armor class is a lot. Going from 16 to 23 armor class is also a lot. So like 7 armor class is a huge deal. Um, and at the point that you're using protection in the game, you don't really have that much skill, and you don't really have that much strength, and you don't really have that much slaying. So you wouldn't really get as much use from the brands that multiply damage, such as the ones that we've been constantly mentioning in the video: flaming, freezing, draining, and Vorpal. So it's really nice to have that defensive brand for the early game. Of course, the more the game progresses, the worse it gets. The least impactful 7 armor class it becomes, and the more impactful it would be for you to have a brand that just helps you kill monsters faster. So yeah. Mm, the counterpart for the late game for protection is, in my opinion, the vampiric brand. Both of them fulfill a very similar role. Protection in the early game gives you, well, a lot of protection. In the late game, vampiric makes you heal a lot. Well, it heals you depending on the amount of damage that you deal on like 60% of the attacks that you inflict with the vampiric weapon. So like the heal scales with the amount of damage that you deal. If you deal a lot of damage, you have a pretty good chance of healing for a lot of HP when attacking monsters that can be affected by that effect. Of course, you shouldn't expect to get healed from hitting a lich, but yeah, like defensive brands, it's just that one is better for the early game and one is better for the late game. Once you're actually dealing good melee damage. Um, the counterpart for Spectral, in my opinion, for the late game is the Speed brand. Both of them kinda increase your melee damage a lot, but Speed brand is, in my opinion, better later in the game because it doesn't place another dude, and you can use it in much more comfortable scenarios later on. For example, with the Spectral brand, since you have to place a dude, which is the Spectral weapon, you need to be fighting in an arena where both you and the spectral weapon can hit the monsters that you're hitting. In the early game, that's not that much of an issue because you're not gonna see bands that are that threatening. But like if you get to depths with your spectral weapon, you're gonna be surrounded by like a troll band and another troll band and an undead band, and then there's the Hell Knights coming from over there, and then there's that random lich that just wandered around from the opposite side of the screen. Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, being surrounded is not good, especially when you're surrounded by that many monsters. So usually I wouldn't like to have a spectral weapon by that time in the game, and it doesn't even have to be in depths. Depths is kind of late game. You can have the same experience in balls. You can even have the same experience in lair branches. The lair branches is a bit more permissive for spectral brand. So yeah, by that time I would like to replace my spectral brand with either one of those late game brands that I've been mentioning, the ones that multiply the damage, or or speed brand. But speed brand is a rare luxury. Very few weapons can actually generate with speed brand naturally. Tanks are one of the most noticeable ones. Short blades can also get speed brand. You can get speed brand in everything, but it needs to be an artifact, and it's extremely unlikely that you will get speed brand on an artifact. It's just really, really rare. Though if you do get it, you should probably think about using it because it's a pretty good brand. So yeah. Oh, one more brand that I haven't really talked about, and I would be showing you about all of these brands, but I don't think I can search for them in game. No, I don't think I can search for them in game. I can search for scroll brand weapon. Yeah, melee weapons will commonly be branded with Vorpal, Flaming, Freezing, Venom, or Protection brand, and rarely with Draining, Electrocution, Spectral, Vampiric, or Chaos brand. Chaos brand is something really dangerous. You should almost never use this. It is going to end in disaster if you do choose to use it. So what I'm trying to say is don't use Crazy Youth's Vampiri or Crazy Youth's Chaos Quarterstaff, even if it's highly enchanted and branded. I know that it is attractive, and I know that it is very alluring, but what's gonna happen is that you're gonna hit a goblin and you're gonna turn it into a berserk hornet or something ridiculous like that. It can happen across a couple of turns of hitting the hornet, that is, but you can polymorph monsters, you can polymorph them into being more powerful monsters, and you can also berserk the monsters that you hit. You can make them faster, you can make them mighty, you can make them invisible. It is something that's super dangerous to use for yourself. You can use Malin Gateway, which summons the Eldritch Tentacle, which has Chaos Brand. And then it's much safer because it's not you hitting the monster with the Chaos Brand. If the things get complicated because the Chaos Brand happens to berserk a monster or turn it into something that's dangerous, you can teleport away or take defensive measures appropriately. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about brands. I do have one more thing to say. Let's see. Garen Gimbal. Okay, Garen Gimbal is a very special exception to my rule. They are plus 12 quick blades of protection, right? But it's two of them. What that means is that you're gonna be applying your slaying twice. So yeah, with a lot of slaying, with Wujian for example, Garen Gimbal can be an insanely strong weapon. I have had Wujian characters with Garen Gimbal, or well, one character with Wujian and Garen Gimbal that literally one-shots orbs of fire, like uses Heavenly Storm, Serpent Slash, and just lunges at the Orb of Fire and literally kills the Orb of Fire from full HP with that one launch using Garen Gimbal. Because this is the ultimate weapon to use with the slaying. It is that good. So that's like an special exception for me and like my brand rules, but it's an artifact, right? On Brand Arts, which is the kind of artifact that you can search for in game. That's an on-brand art. Those ones break the rules always. Like Rift is an on-brand art, Demon Trident of Distortion with one extra range, and the one extra range is so massive when it comes to handling Distortion brand because like it is much less of an impact to blink monsters away when you can hit them from further away yourself. So yeah, Rift is fantastic, Garen Gimbal is fantastic, and also Vampire's Tooth is also fantastic. This is a quick blade of Vampiric quick blade. So this one has a special property that no other vampiric weapon shares. It occasionally heals its wielder for the full amount of damage dealt when it wounds a living foe. So 60% of the time it will heal you for the entirety of the damage. Other vampiric weapons heal you for damage depending, or they will heal you depending on the damage that they inflict on the monster. Vampire's Tooth heals you for the whole damage. By extension, once again, it's a quick blade. It scales really hard with slaying. So that's that. There's one more weapon that I want to talk about, which is very. It's an artifact, and that would be Leech. Leech is the other side of the coin for Vampiric. This is a demon blade. So base damage 13, base attack delay 1.3, scales with dexterity because it's a blade. So really cool. And it heals its wielder for a portion of the damage dealt every time it strikes a living foe. This is the opposite. This one doesn't heal you for the full damage, but it does heal you with every melee attack. It's a very dangerous weapon to use because it has harm, which means that you're gonna take more damage and you're gonna receive more damage. Um, but it kinda works out if you consider that it heals you with every melee attack. It's a very interesting weapon to use. I have not gotten the opportunity to try it ever since it got reworked. But it definitely is like the one weapon that I would like to use that has harm, just because it has such a strong vampiric effect that heals you with every melee attack. That kind of consistency and reliability is something rare and very appreciated when it comes to melee weapons in Crawl. Everything is just like it has a chance, it has a chance, it has a chance. On top of the inherent unreliability of melee, dodging and evasion and just missing and monsters with shields. Um, so yeah, it can be pretty rough to use a melee weapon, especially because you have to be close to the monsters, so that leaves less room for escaping. But yeah, overall, that's all my thoughts on weapon brands and why some weapon brands are better on some weapon types compared to other brands. You should think about the attack delay and and the base damage whenever you're choosing a brand for your weapon. So with some weapons, it's really bad to stay on some brands. Like for example, it's much more noticeable on the smaller, faster weapons such as the quick blades to stay on something like flaming or freezing than it is on like a great mace to stay on the electrocution. Like on a great mace of electrocution is not the worst thing ever, but it also is worse than just having a multiplicative brand. Um, but the other way around is it is much worse. So do try to rebrand your fast weapons, your demon whips, your demon tridents, your demon blades, your quick blades, your short blades in general, to try to have them have a good brand that suits their strengths. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, you should consider following on Twitch and liking or subscribing to my YouTube if you haven't already. I need 1,000 subscribers to be able to monetize this thing, and that would also help me. So if you can get me to 1,000, I would appreciate that a lot. If you really enjoyed it, there's a Patreon link down there in the description. There's also the ability to subscribe on Twitch. If you have Twitch Prime, you can subscribe for free, and it also helps me a lot when you choose to do so. So I would appreciate it. And with that being said, there will be more videos to come talking about some things that I usually mention in my playthroughs and that people in the comments have asked me to make videos about, or just things that I talk about while I'm on stream and I'm like, yo, I should make a video about that. So yeah, you can look forward to more videos like these, in addition to, the spell overviews and just my usual crawl characters. So I hope you have a nice rest of your day, and I hope you enjoy the video one more time. See you around.